The Doppelganger kids, Chris, Carrie, Katie, and Corey, all fresh, all innocent, and all waiting for a revenge that they know will someday be theirs. For now, however, they sit in a damp, empty attic and wait. They wait not for days, but for years. Have you ever heard about flowers in the attic? Well, I have. And I have read the first three books of this saga when I was, I think, 13 or 14 years old. I'm not sure. I was young for these books, but despite of all of the mess, they became one of my favorite books at that time. I recently found them on my audiobooks app and I decided to listen to them again. So I played the first book and I realized how up we are. Now that time have passed and I'm way older than the first time I read these books, I can't help but wonder, are these books okay for people to read? Are we little fragile things who can't handle these kind of topics? Or it is really a concern that these topics are displayed this way? There's something we need to keep in mind, and that's the fact that these books were written and published in the 80s. The world was way different back then. We have evolved as a society since then, kind of. But in general, yeah, we have. So, if we consider this, the content of these books are totally normal for their time. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. What are these books even about? And who's the person behind them? Regina Cleo Andrews, known as VC Andrews, was a woman born in Virginia Beach in the USA. It was the youngest child and only daughter. As a teenager, Andrews suffered a fall from a school stairwell, resulting in a severe back injuries, leaving her in a wheelchair. As an adult, Andrews lived with her mother, to whom she dedicated her first novel. Flowers in the Attic was not her first novel. In fact, she had written about 9 books prior, being this one her seventh. But this one was the first being published. She was 53 when her editor, Aunt Patty, discovered the manuscript from one of her friends who was Busy's agent. The novel, published in 1979, was an instant popular success, reaching the top of the bestsellers list in only 2 weeks. When the publishers realized how big of a success they had in their hands, they wanted more. Anne asked if she could have a sequel so it could come out a year from November when Flowers were going to be published. So here I'm not really sure what's true, because in an interview BC Andrews did for the Twilight Zone magazine, she told the sequel, Petals of the Wind, was already written in the first 9 novels she did before being published. But Anne Patty wrote an article for The Toast in 2013 telling that the day she asked BC for a sequel, they both basically brainstormed what ended up being the outline of the sequel. Whatever the case is, this sequel was a major success as well, and the readers were avid to know what happened after Petals. The publishers asked Andrew to do a third, but she didn't really want to. At this point, she has grown tired of the characters. This book itself has even 2 adaptations. The first was in 1987 and the second in 2014. The rest of the books has their own adaptations as well, premiered between 2014 and 2015, completing the stories. The Doppelganger saga, where Flowers in the Attic belongs, has a total of 8 books. They are Flowers in the Attic as the first in the series, followed by Petals of the Wind, the third one, If There Be Thorns, 4. Seeds of Yesterday, 5th. Gardens of Shadow, who actually has its own TV adaptation in 2022 the Lifetime released a television limited series called Flowers in the Attic: The Origin. The rest are 7. Christopher's Diary: Secrets of Foxwore, 7. Christopher's Diary: Echoes of Doppelganger, and 8. Christopher's Diary: Secret Brother. But only the first 4 books were written entirely by B.C. Andrews. When she died in 1963, a ghostwriter took upon the outline of Garden of Shadows, and the rest was entirely written by the ghostwriter, Andrew Niederman, who followed the same style of B.C. to complete the series. I will approach just the first book in this video. The original plan was to talk about the first 2 books, but there's a lot to talk about both of them. So I will talk about the second one in another video. Now that we kind of know the person behind, we can talk about the books. What are we getting into with Flowers in the Attic? At the top of the stairs, there are 4 secrets hidden: blonde, beautiful, innocent, and struggling to stay alive. They were a perfect family, golden and carefree, until a heartbreaking tragedy shattered their happiness. Now, for the sake of a inheritance that will ensure the future, the children must be hidden away out of sight, as if they never existed, kept on the top floor of their grandmother's vast mansion. Their loving mother assures them it will be just for a little while, but as brutal days swell into agonizing months and years, Katie, Chris, and twins Corey and Carrie realize their survival is at the mercy of the cruel and superstitious grandmother. Yeah. Okay, but for real, what's this book even about? The story revolves around these 4 kids who we told have a perfect life, with perfect parents and perfect blonde hair and blue eyes, and they are just so perfect. But life gets in the way, and their father dies really early in the book, leaving a lovely mother with the pain of raising and supporting the family and debts to pay. The problem is that this poor woman is completely useless. Why? I don't know. It's the 50s. She doesn't have a career or skills to support the family. So, instead of looking for a job like a regular person will do, she came up with the only possible solution for this horrible situation. She wrote to her parents, who disinherited her because, and listen well, she married her half-uncle and ran away with him. Corinne, the mother of the kids, reveals that her family is really rich, and she is in the hopes of getting her father's love and inheritance back so she can support the kids. She takes these 4 kids, Chris, 14 years old, Katie, 12 years old, and the most insufferable toddler, Carrie, and her quiet shadow, Corey, 5 years old twins, in the middle of the night after receiving a letter from her mother taking her back with some conditions. When they arrive to this giant house, they meet the grandmother that later forced Corinne to reveal to her children that the reason for her disinheritance was that her husband was Corinne's half-uncle, and that they are products of incest. So, they will have to hide until she regains the love and inheritance back from her father. But the mother promised it won't be more than a day or 2. Corinne's parents are obsessed with religion, so this obviously was a big deal for them. And now the grandmother is obsessed with the idea of incest between these kids. So she makes all of these rules to avoid them being intimate. On the other hand, the only place these kids have to play is the attic, of course. So the older siblings try to make this better for the twins, and came up with instructions and stories about why they can't go outside, while the grandmother goes every morning with a picnic basket full of food for the whole day and asks them weird questions about them being modest and petty. The mother, Corinne, goes every day to visit the kids and came with all kind of toys and presents, which in the beginning works wonders for them, but after they've been there for months, they start asking for freedom. And the mom reveals they now have to wait until the old man dies. So, the time goes by, and now Kitty and Chris hit puberty, and things get weird. They start developing sexual and romantic attraction towards each other. By they,
I mean, mostly and probably only Katie.
do the best they can to deny the feelings. Later on, the grandmother catches Chris staring at Katie half dressed, so she punishes them by starving the four of them for 2 weeks, and Corinne is nowhere to be found. After 2 weeks has passed, they decide to escape, but the grandmother starts bringing them food again, and this time there's a dessert included. After some time, the kids start feeling sick often. A year has passed, and Corinne, after several months of absence, came back and reveals she got married again. With this new information and the lack of interest of the mother for the kids, Chris and Kitty realize they never gonna get out if they doesn't escape. So they came up with a plan and made a wooden skeleton key in order to get out of the room and steal money to escape. They spent several months sliding into her mother's suite to steal a little bit of money each time. They take turns to do it. One night, Kitty finds Bart, her stepfather, sleeping in the room and she kisses him. I swear to God, this character has the worst decision making on history. Later on, Chris finds out about the kiss and he rapes Katie out of jealousy and rage. And shortly after it's over, he is filled with remorse and guilt and apologizes to Katie, but she feels guilty too. After this scene, one of the twins, Corey, becomes deadly ill, and they beg to her mother to take him to a hospital. She hesitates, but after Katie threatens her, she takes him. Corinne comes back the next morning and let them know he died of pneumonia. So, the brothers resume the stealing to escape and discover that her mother and Bart have moved out for good. And through a conversation between the servants, they find out the grandfather has been dead for a year, and the grandmother has been leaving poisoned food in the attics for the mouses being them. The three remaining kids finally leave and catch a train to Florida. Chris then reveals he discovered Corinne's inheritance is conditional upon her having no children from her first marriage, and she, rather than the grandmother, was the one who most likely poisoned them. Chris told Katie to decide if they are going to the police, but to have in mind they will be separate. So Katie decided not to go to the police as their main concern is to stay together. But Katie vows that one day she will make Corinne pay for her crimes. We can see how twisted this story is. It is filled with death, violence, betrayal, rage, incest, and love. In almost every article or interview that I read for this video, at some point they describe the story between Kitty and Chris as a love story, a forbidden love story, or just a simple incest. Even the author fails to see the problem in the dynamic between Kitty and Chris. Actually, she once told to the Washington Post the following: I don't see why people find the incest so shocking. I felt it would have happened naturally. Then, a review claims, this is a novel about forbidden love, which of course was immensely appealing through the story to readers. But why? Why is this so shocking? I mean, back then, incest was pretty common. People knew people in their families who had incest. And this was even a common historical practice if we think about royalty or even wealth families who wanted to keep the name on the wall between them. So, why? What is the problem? Even according to an article from The Atlantic, written by Sarah Shang, published earlier this year, claims that in the 80s, feminist scholars argue, based on the testimonies of victims, that incest was far more common than recognized, and in recent years, DNA has offered a new kind of biological proof. Widespread genetic testing is uncovering case after secret case of children born to close biological relatives, providing an unprecedented accounting of incest in modern society. Of course, I understand that incest itself is enough to give the chills to most of us. It's a taboo, a sin even in most of religions, but let's be clear, this is not a love story with incest. The problem here lies on the fact that, as I said earlier, we have the author and plenty of critics and reviews calling this a love story, back then when it's not. And for my horror, while doing this research, I found a review back from 2014, just 10 years ago, telling us this. The incest plot was hot, which is not to say that girls actually want to sleep with their brothers, sisters, or uncles. It's not even to say that girls fantasize about it in great numbers, but consensual incest caters to the nonsense desires of many preteen girls, that is, girls who aren't yet sexually active, but who are beginning to think in terms of sexuality and have erotic impulses. A 12 years old who has yet to be kissed might well be simultaneously drawn to and repulsed by the thought of sex, and what will make it a mentally safe spot where she could feel aroused and not repulsed? A non-loving, non-threatening partner, that is, a brother. Not her own brother, of course. I'm guessing most girls will be repulsed by the thought of actually kissing her own brother. But with Flores in the attic, the teen reader is aligned with Katie by dint of being a girl. She gets to experience the thrill of sex without having to entirely shed any vestiges of "ew" voice, because she knows that her brother, that is Chris, is a loving, nurturing person who is above all safe. So, by becoming Katie, the reader is able to experience sex, which, if memory serves, the average early adolescent sees as a combination of forbidden and arousing, in a way that's both. Of course, the whole brothers are safe thing is complicated just a bit by the weird matter of consent. Later, the author of this review basically says that a lot of girls fantasize with rape. And later on, she continues. The first time I floated this girls like incest fantasies beat out loud, one woman pointed out that for a good number of girls, rape and incest are realities, and that eroticizing them reinforces the idea that there's something sexy about non-consensual sex. But that's not what's going on with flowers. It's in the realm of fantasy. It's even constructed as such within the book. As literature professor Cynthia Griffin Wolf writes of earlier Gothic work, part of the hallmarks of Gothic literature is a set of conventions within which respectable feminine sexuality might find expression. It's understood by the reader as a way to get to read other filled with a sort of free pass for wanting to do so in the first place. Case in point, when I read it as an adult, I found that I erased any rape overtones from my memory of reading it as a kid. I saw it for what it was, and judging from the way my friends talk about in the time, they did it too. Nobody in their right mind will hand into a young victim as a depiction of her experience. Read as such, it's horrific. But that's not how it's read by its readers, I don't think. I would say that when I first read this book,
I forgot about the rape scene as well. I overlooked it and I was surprised when I read this again. The author make it clear it's a rape. There's no excuse or any logic way to see it in a romantic or excited way. The scene literally goes like this. You're mine, Katie. Mine. You'll always be mine. No matter who comes into your future, you'll belong to me. You'll always belong to me. I'll make you mine. Tonight. Now. And after this, it's the rape scene.
So, imagine my surprise when I found that review from a woman in 2014 telling us that the incest part of this book was hot and that the author is not eroticizing and reinforcing the idea of non consensual sex as something sexy. But this is absurd. If you read a book that clearly says a brother is raping her sister and later decide that the incest in the book is hot, you are romanticizing the idea of rape. There's no way we can consider this relationship as romantic. It's clear he raped her. The scene where it happens describes how she wrestles and tries to fight him back. And yes, there's plenty of scenes with internal dialogues from Katie thinking about Chris in a romantic way. After all, she's trapped in this attic without any human contact, besides her siblings. Of course she can get confused. She loves her brother. She thinks he's amazing, and she's constantly saying how much she wants to marry a man like him, not to marry him. She wants a man like Chris, and even a man like her father. She knows this is wrong, and that what she could possibly feel towards his brother it's not what she wants for the future. I believe there's a few issues who make Katie confused on her relationship with Chris. One of them being she and Chris acting like parents for the twins. Since the beginning of the confinement, we see how protective they are with the twins, and as the story progresses, this gets reinforced more and more. That is so, they start calling Katie mom. In consequence, the older brothers start acting more like parents, and sequentially, they start seeing each other like husband and wife at some point. Other point is the way they were raised. I honestly believe that it takes part in how easy it is for them to think about each other like they were the standard to measure the person they were going to love and marry. And this could be normal if it weren't for the way they expressed about each other. I mean, the way Katie talks about Chris is not a common way to think about a brother. And the things Chris says to Katie even before it gets incestuous is weird. I'm not saying we can think positively about a sibling, but the words and the way this whole family express about each other just give me the ick. For example, in a chapter, the mom, Corinne, slaps Chris for something he did, but when she realized the look on his face, she starts imploring for forgiveness and tucks his face and places him in her breast. And then she kisses him all over the face. And in that same scene, when she's saying goodbye, she kisses him on the lips. Katie finds all of this weird and too sexual for a mother to do to his kid. Other point being trauma. Chris becomes the only person who she can talk to who understands her. She and her siblings are in an infamous position that no one else could ever grasp. When two people experience this together, it's possible to form an intense bond due to the intensity and shared nature of the traumatic experience, and even create a sense of belonging between Katie and Chris. Other point being Chris' weird behavior towards Katie, because when he starts seeing her differently, and treating her inappropriately, it's when she really starts thinking about him in a non fraternal way sometimes. One could even consider his behavior as grooming, and I'm gonna tell you why. In chapter 8, Katie is dancing, but she stops because realizes Chris is in the shadows staring at her with the odious expression on his face, as Katie itself describes. And we can imagine what kind of look he's giving her. Because this makes Katie to think about how Chris is about to be 15 and already looks like a man. And she even wonders if it's the age or just that big looks in his eyes. Katie probably realized he's looking at her like a man looks at a woman because she saw her father looking at her mother in this way at some point, and she's perceiving the same energy from her brother. Chris asking her mother to bring leotards to Katie. This can be seen as an act from a caring brother, but because of the scene that I just talked about, this can be perceived as something he will too enjoy to stare at. And let's remember that gift can be a manipulative tactic. In this case, I will say Katie is gonna think about Chris even in a better light because of this. And this is not a regular gift, it's something really important for Katie. So the feelings she could develop from this action could embed deeper. There's an accident between Chris and their mother because he escaped their room to explore the house that really altered the kids. And because of this, he goes into Katie's bed to cuddle her and tell her everything that happened in the exploration. At some point in the conversation, he explains to Katie how everyone has changed and how she has changed so much, but fails to tell her how. This scene in particular is really problematic because he's taking advantage of the vulnerability of the situation to be physically near as possible to Katie. He knows she won't deny he going to bed because she feels bad about what happened with her mother, so he can easily go into her bed and cuddle her. And the fact that he implies how much she has changed but denies to explain further, even when she asks several times, just let her wondering about how he's seeing her now. Later on, he described what he saw outside, but Katie thinks he spoke in a quivering voice, telling her this. You were there beside me. I felt you there, holding onto my hand, whispering in my ear, and I looked all the harder, just so you could see what I did. By using this weird voice that Katie claims and telling her this, he's inserting himself in Katie's head in this new non-fraternal view. Chris keeps staring at Katie's body without trouble. She tries to hide her chest with big clothes because she felt uncomfortable in her new growing body. He is giving her attention she doesn't comprehend, a kind of attention an adolescent shouldn't give to a kid. He's 15 and she's 12. These are worlds apart when you are in those ages. Chris has knowledge about sexuality she lacks, and we know this because they have conversations about sex that demonstrate how little Katie knows about the topic. This is enough for this situation to be really inappropriate, without talking about the incest, of course. In chapter 13, Katie is staring at herself naked in the mirror because she is curious about her own body, and starts dancing in front of it, watching all the poses she does when suddenly see Chris in the shadows, again watching her. He stares at her slowly, up and down. Katie asks him to go away, but he doesn't respond, so she grabs her dress, and before she can cover herself, he says, "Don't. I know I shouldn't be, but you look so beautiful. It's like I never saw you before. How did you grow so lovely when it was here the whole time?" Chris refused to respect Katie's wishes of privacy, and even appears Chris is blaming on her that he can't look away because she's beautiful, so it's her fault he's giving her this attention because how his sister dares to grow a body. Later in the same chapter, we have a moment where he feeds his own blood to the twins because the grandmother went into the room when he was staring at a naked Katie, so they got punished by taking away the food. But this particular scene, where he feeds them with his own blood, seems it's made for the readers to think that despite his flaws, he's good and can be trusted. How can Katie possibly think he's wrong when he's capable of doing this for them? This is almost a redemption for the character, so we and Katie forgive him for his faults. Then, in chapter 14, it's not a surprise to the reader that we present the first time Kitty is being physically attracted to Chris. It's almost expected that she will feel this at some point, because the author has portrayed this young man so well that we can see him as a predator. So, we expect Kitty to finally fall for him. But also, Kitty is a hopeless romantic. She's always thinking about love and dates, and she's afraid she will never be loved like she desires. That's why when Chris acts on her, she gets confused, because she wants that attention. She wants to be loved and desired, so she gets caught on his actions. In chapter 15, the grandmother punished Chris and Katie again by beating them, so they end up shirtless, taking care of each other's wounds. They end up cuddling once again, and Chris starts to caress Kitty's hair and cheek. And then he pulls her for a kiss, but Kitty knows this is wrong and pulls his away when she feels his erection. This is another perfect example, as Chris always makes his moves onto Kitty when she's most vulnerable. And even so, Kitty most times realizes that's not what she wants. For whatever reason it is, it can be because she doesn't want the grandmother to be right about them, but still it's a no from her. And he doesn't respect it, and make moves when sees the opportunity. On chapter 18, Chris and Katie are in the attic reading and discussing a story. Suddenly, they decide the best idea is to give Chris a haircut so he can feel manly again. When Katie has finished, for some reason I cannot comprehend, Chris decides to take the scissors away from her and joke that he's cutting her hair off. This makes Katie panic and start running away from him. So he chases her down until they trip and he cuts her side in the fall. After he takes care of the cut and makes sure it's not a big deal, Katie tells him it's not his fault, and Chris tells something really telling of his character. Why did you run? Because you ran, I had to chase. This phrase tells a lot about Chris. He thinks his actions are a consequence of Katie's, not his decisions. So he's not to blame when he makes a bad one. For this next part of the video, I'm going to do a trigger warning. I'm going to be talking about rape, victim blame, and victim guilt. In chapter 19, Chris decides they finally need to escape. So he goes into her mother's bedroom to steal money a little bit each time he goes. But in this chapter, we see the siblings are slowly getting sick. We begin this with Chris being sick, so he asks Katie to go and steal the money for him that day. She does, even though she's afraid. And when she's there, she sees her mother's husband asleep on a chair. A lot of things happen in this chapter, but basically she realized how young this new husband is and how hot he is, and she decides that she wants him. Seeing this young man that it's not related to her makes her feel confused, but determined to avoid whatever Chris and her could romantically do. She kisses him and escapes without stealing any money. When she's back in the attic, she lies to Chris about the reason she didn't get the money, but
he doesn't believe her anyway. When Chris is finally okay to go out, he goes again to her mother's room to steal money, but her mother and her husband came back, so he needs to hide in the closet. And he overheard a conversation that basically says how Bart, the husband, is worried because they're missing money and that he wants to move out, but Corinne can't. Then she proceeds to argue with him because she's mad because he left her alone in the previous party, and he claims he will do it every single night if he dreamed about that young blonde girl who kissed him in his sleep that night. Chris realizes he's talking about Katie and gets really mad. They eventually leave, and here comes the nightmare. He goes to the attic and finds Katie in a transparent blue nightie that their mother gave her once. Tell her how beautiful she is and that he can see her body through her nightie. And suddenly he races off and tell her everything he overheard. Tell her how stupid she is for kissing Bart, but the mask falls off, and let her know what he's really upset about. But I'll better read to you this entire scene. Something creaked behind me. A soft step on rotting wood. I jumped, startled, scared, and turned, expecting to see God's know what. Then I sighed, but it was only Chris, standing in the gloom, silently staring at me. Why? Did I look prettier than usual? Was it the moonlight shining through my 80 clothes? All random doubts were clear when he said, in a voice gritty and low, "You look beautiful sitting there like that." He cleared the frog in his throat. The moonlight is itching you with silver blue, and I can see the shape of your body through your clothes. Then, bewilderingly, he seized me by the shoulders, digging in his fingers. Hard. They hurt. Damn you, Katie. You kissed that man. He could have awakened and see you, and demand to know who you were, and not thought you only part of his dream. Scary the way he acted, the fright I felt for no reason at all. How do you know what I did? You weren't there. You were sick that night. He shocked me, glaring his eyes, and again I thought he seemed strange. He saw you, Katie. He wasn't soundly asleep. He saw me? I cried, disbelieving. It wasn't possible. It wasn't. Yes, he yelled. This was Chris, who was usually in such control of his emotions. He thought you were a part of his dreams. But don't you know Mama can guess who it was by just putting two and two together, just as I have? Damn you and your romantic notions. Now they are onto us. They won't leave money casually about as they did before. He's counting, she's counting, and we don't have enough yet. He yanked me down from the windowsill. He appeared wild and furious enough to slap my face, and not once in all our life had he ever struck me, though I'd give him reason to when I was younger. But he shocked me until my eyes rolled, until I was dizzy and crying out, "Stop! Mama knows we can pass through a locked door." This wasn't Chris. This was someone I'd never seen before. Primitive, savage. He yelled out something like, "You're mine, Katie, mine. You'll always be mine. No matter who comes into your future, you'll always belong to me. I'll make you mine, tonight, now." I didn't believe it, not Chris, and I did not fully understand what he had in mind, nor, if I am to give him credit, do I think he really meant what he said. But passion has a way of taking over. We fell to the floor, both of us. I tried to fight him off. We wrestled, turning over and over, reading silent, a frantic struggle of his strength against mine. It wasn't much of a battle. I had the strong, denser legs. He had the biceps, the greater weight and height, and he had much more determination than I to use something hot, swollen, and demanding. So much I stole reasoning and sanity from him. And I loved him. I wanted what he wanted, if he wanted it that much, right or wrong. Somehow, we end up on that old mattress, that filthy, smelly, stained mattress that must have known lovers long before this night.
And that is where he took me and forced in that swollen, rigid male sex part of him that had to be satisfied. He drove into my thigh and resisting flesh, which tore and bled. Now we have done what we both swore we'll never do. There's a lot to unpack here, but I think we can all agree that this is not a forbidden love story, this is not romantic, it's plain great. Let's begin with the fact that Chris is always staring at Katie without her consent. It's always lurking in the shadows, and Katie is always being scared when she realizes that someone's there. It is obvious from the rape scene that this is a grooming case. The way that sex falls into place, it's violent. It's Chris demanding something he thinks he deserves because Katie has been denying his moves once and once again. So why everyone think this is a love story? And what the author think this is? It's VC Andrew's fault. The words and tone she used to describe any interaction between Chris and Katie, it's way too romantic. Even before they start seeing each other as something else than brothers. But especially after we are introduced to this side of their story. When she's describing the rape scene, there's a phrase that says, "But passion has a way of taking over," as an excuse for Chris' behavior. As if the passion this brother feels is something so grand, he can't contain the love inside anymore. Then, in the same scene, there's another phrase that said, "I loved him, and I wanted what he wanted, wrong or right, if he wanted it that much." As if Katie was this grateful lady, willing to do everything for her great love. But the reality is that we have seen Katie telling him no over and over again, in multiple scenarios, but she crumbles here. She needs a way to cope with the horrible situation she's living, so she can convince herself she wants it. But even when she's trying to convince herself to get through this, she's doing it for him. She is just a victim, trying to cope with everything. We can even say that she will agree to this to satisfy her own sexual desires, because she has decided over and over again that she will not act on these desires with her brother. So, what the author does at portraying Kitty as a willing participant in this relationship doesn't make any sense. We could say she's guilty of sentimental incesto. This is something we see often. When a mother or a father forbid their children to have romantic relationships because they are afraid they can be relegated, or even with brothers and sisters possessive and jealous of their romantic relationships, this kind of incest is way too normalized in our society. And here we see how the interpersonal relationships between this family are quite peculiar. I could not say that every relationship in this family is incestual, but they do relate in a very peculiar way between them. We see how Katie's feelings toward Chris can be justified. He's the one being there for her. He supports her and takes care of her and the twins. He is her only company through the years. Of course, if someone spends that much time with someone else under those circumstances, you can develop loyalty, admiration, and great love. We can't forget Chris was a kid too. Is he a victim as well? I believe so. He was really young and was in the same position as Katie, but he's the one who disrespects her desires all the time. Despite everything, this doesn't justify what he did to her. He even managed to think they can have a romantic relationship despite the rape and the fact that they are brothers. We do have seen Chris grooming Katie from chapter A and until the end of the novel. The author desperately wants us to believe this is a love story to the point to portray Kitty as an equal to Chris and not the victim that she is. She has convinced herself there's a we in the actions her brother delivered. She can blame him because he's the only person she could count on, and he committed the worst possible betrayal. So, if Kitty condemns him, what would she have left? This gets worse on the next book, And we can see how the relationship between Katie and Chris shapes the view for Katie in what romantic relationships should be. There's a lot more I could say about this, but I will talk about that on the next part of the video.